All right, thank you, Shani. Welcome, everyone. So, as my colleague mentioned, this will be really an introductory course to the memoQ server with some basics and maybe with some tips and tricks that might not be as straightforward. And let me just go ahead, share my screen, hopefully the right one, and we can jump right into this. Okay, we don't need this one. All right, so to get started, whatever I will do today, I will be doing that on a memoQ server, so I won't do anything locally, basically. And the idea is that if you have a memoQ server, this would allow for online collaboration between multiple users. These users could be project managers, translators, proofreaders, maybe terminologists. What you have to know is that if you have a memoQ server, you always have two ways to access that memoQ server. One is to use the Windows application that you can see right now, and the other way would be through your web browser. Now, the web interface is a lightweight version of the Windows application, so it doesn't have all the functionality. But as you will see, there will be actually actions that's easier to do on the web than in the Windows application. And that being said, let's get started. So I am already connected to my own memoQ server as a project manager. And basically, this would be the main window that you see when you start the application. On this dashboard, you will see all of the previous projects that you created or those projects where you were assigned as a project manager. In theory, it would be possible for two project managers to work on the same server and never see each other's projects. That way, for example, multiple teams could use the same server, but still have some separation of the content that they are translating. Now, obviously, I could at any point reuse one of my existing projects, but today, I think let's just go ahead and create a new one from scratch. So let's assume that we receive new files from a new client and we want to create a new project. For this, we will always have two options. One option is that we can do everything the manual way. This is called a new online project in memoQ. And the other option is to use a project template, which is predefined settings for our project. One thing that's a common mistake is that you can also click on that little icon to create the project, but usually you never want to do that because that would create a local project that is only available for me. So I want to click the little drop down and then let's just do the manual project creation. So right here on the first page, of course, we need a project name. Later on, we can use this to filter for the project, of course, and find previously translated files. This name can be anything as long as Windows allows it. And we also have some metadata. What type of files we are translating, who did we receive those files from? When we are creating the project the manual way, like I am doing right now, these are really just there to organize the project. So once again, I could filter for a certain client, find previously translated files, or maybe run reports on only a set of projects instead of all of them. If I would be using project templates instead, these would have an additional function where certain linguistic resources could be assigned to the project based on this metadata. So if I have, let's say, client-specific terminology, I could enter, let's say, memoQ marketing as my client, and the specific terminology database could be assigned. I will show you that a little bit later. These are completely optional fields, so you can also just keep them empty if they are not interesting to you. On the next page, we will select our languages. This is not really interesting. What you have to know is every project has one source language. So let's say we translate English files here, and we can translate those English files into as many languages as we want. Later on, you can add more target languages to the project, but you cannot remove them. But of course, when you are uploading documents for translation, you can still memoQ. You can tell memoQ that you are only doing, let's say, a German translation this time. And you also have two more pages of the project creation, where you have some workflow options on how your translators would be working on this project or on these files. Now, obviously, these only make sense as long as the translator works in memoQ. As soon as you outsource the translation, let's say you send out a translation package or you send out a bilingual file, these options don't really change much. Let's say that your translator does work in memoQ. In that case, you could go ahead and change all of these. And let's just mention a few, maybe the more interesting options here. The first three is track changes, which works the exact same way as in Microsoft Word. If you are doing the translation and the proofreading as well, it could be useful to enable track changes so you can immediately compare different versions of the document. That being said, it's not mandatory to enable track changes because memoQ also tracks the version history of the documents. We have this on the first page. So even if you don't have track changes enabled, you still have options to compare the different versions, let's say the translated version to the proofread version. Then you have the package creation option that I already mentioned. So if you have translators who prefer to work offline or who would prefer to work with their own tool instead of memoQ, you could send them translation packages, which would contain bilingual files, and it would contain extracts of your linguistic resources like terminology databases or translation memories. The other interesting option could be workflow phases can overlap. Since we are talking about online collaboration, if this option is enabled, translators and proofreaders can work on the same document at the same time, and this could result in faster turnaround times. Basically, as soon as a few sentences are translated in the document, someone else can also open that and start proofreading the already translated. You also have some confidentiality measures. If you don't want your translators to use machine translation, for example, you can disable the plugins that we have. Of course, this doesn't disable copy pasting, right? So a translator could still copy paste content out of memoQ and let's say just put it into Google Translate. So there is not a 100% correct way of disabling this, but still at least they cannot automatically use those. And similarly, if we move to the next page, you will see options like allowing creation of offline copies of resources. Once again, this would just help translators whose internet connection is not the best. You can also disallow the translators from downloading the final translated file. This could even be in the confidentiality measures a window instead of having it on the system. In any case, once you are okay with these settings, you would click Finish to create the project. And you have to keep in mind that most of these settings cannot be changed after the project is created. So you have to make sure that you are using the correct options. Later on, you would have to create a new project if you want to change most of these. Now, once you have the project, you can double click that project to open this for management. And of course, on the dashboard, you always see some information about the projects themselves. Size is either the word count or the sentence count of the documents that you uploaded. If you right click, you will actually see this base progress on option. You can see that currently it shows segments, but I could say that I'm interested in the word count instead. And of course, you can see how the project is progressing, what would be the latest deadline. And if you right click this top row, you can also customize this view to see the relevant information. Still, from this interface, you can always run project reports on the filtered list. You just have to right click and select the project report option, which would contain information about every selected project and every document within those projects. Let's just go ahead and open this newly created project, and you will see that this opens in a separate memoQ window. So if you have to manage multiple projects, you don't have to close one to be able to open another one. But we are just interested in this one that I created. And from here, we can actually manage the project. Whatever I will be doing here, you could do in any order. I will just show you really one workflow. So the first thing is the translations page. This is where you upload documents for translation. And the easiest way to upload files is you can just drag and drop them into the project. So that's what I will do. I just have to go back to my desktop. And let's say I have this Word document here. I can drop that into the project. You will see that this document actually appears twice because I have two target languages. I will do a German and I will do a French translation as well. So there we go. We have the two files right here. Now, of course, in some cases, you might have to exclude content from translation. In that case, we cannot drag and drop files. We would have to use something called import with options. And once again, I will just select the same document. And I want to show you two options here. One is the change action and languages, where you can select what translations we want to do. So let's say we only want to translate this file into German, then that's what I would select here. And if you click change filter and configuration, you will see file type specific settings. This is a Microsoft Word document, so I can, let's say, import hidden text for translation. Or if the original file contained comments, I could decide to import those because they can give some context to the translators. Similarly, I could also import track changes instead of accepting them. And different file types, of course, would have different options to choose from. With an Excel file, for example, I could simply select what to do with each column. I could say column A is the source text, B could be the German translation, and C could be the French translation as an example. And of course, we have many more file types that we can handle, but there is one more very interesting one, which is a regex text filter. So basically, memoQ can handle any text-based file. Text-based file means that if you open the document with Notepad and you can actually read the content, then you can use the regex text filter to write a new filter configuration to only import the actual translatable content from that file. Now, of course, regex text filter uses regular expressions, which might not be as simple, but our support or business services department can help you create filters for these files. Now, once you have the documents that you want to translate, the next step would be to decide who will do the translation. And basically, every translator project manager will have a user account on your server. And this is actually where creating user accounts on the web interface would be probably easier than doing that in the Windows application. So just to show you how this works is I have to go into the server administrator, the purple cloud icon up top. From there, I have to connect to my memoQ server. I have to go to user management. I would click add, and I would fill all of these out with my translator's information. After I did that, so I entered the username, password, and whatnot, I would have to send this to the translator, telling him that, okay, here is your information. This is what you can use to log in. Now, instead of doing that, you could go to memoQ web and log into your memoQ server using the same user account that you would use through the Windows application. If we just give this a second, you will see that there is an admin page on the left side. And this admin page have a user management option, which would be similar to this user management in the Windows application that I showed you, but it does have one additional function. If you click add user on the top right, you will see that this checkbox was not available in the Windows application. This basically means that I don't have to set the password of this user. I simply enter their name, their username, and their email address, and they would receive an email notification and they could set up their own password. I don't have to manually reach out to them with their details. Now, Once we have the users, we have to add them to the project. Currently, as you will see, only the admin user is part of this project. This is the user that created the project. And I just click add user, and I would select, let's say, 2 of my existing translators. Once I have the user selected, I can move back to translations, and I can actually go ahead and assign them to the document. There is a very simple assignment method. So for every document, you have 3 workflow steps: translation, review 1, and review 2. And for every document, you choose which steps you want to use. But a very simple assignment could be, let's say, admin will do the translation. We could say we have 1 day to do that. That's to do a proofreading of that translation. And I can even use the same user in multiple roles. So I could say the admin will do a final editing of the file at the end. If you want more advanced assignment functions, you would have to right-click the document to find them. I will show you only a few of these. So one is slicing. If you have a huge file and you have to quickly translate it, you can slice it into multiple parts. You decide how many parts you want to create, and the parts will be created based on word count in the document. So each translator should have more or less the same number of words to be translated. And then you can assign each slice to a different translator. This would allow the translators to see the whole document, so they would have context on what they are translating, but they wouldn't be able to modify each other's parts. And if you need even more options, you would find those under the advanced function, where, once again, just showing you a few of these. One is first accept. So if you are working with freelancers and you are not sure who is currently available, you can just assign everyone to the documents. And then they have the option to check the content of the file to be able to see the deadline. And based on this information, they could decide to accept or reject that job. If someone accepts, then obviously they would be assigned as the translator, and the others would be logged out from that point on. And this is also where you can outsource translations to another agency. That would be called a sub-vendor in memoQ. A sub-vendor workflow indicates that this agency also works with memoQ. It only makes sense if this is true. But basically, you would assign an agency to do the translation or the full workflow. They would log into your memoQ server and assign the documents to their own translators. And the benefit of this is you don't have to know who their translators are, but you can still track the progress of the project in real time because they are working on your server. And with this assignment, I want to show you another benefit of using memoQ Web. So let's say we assign the translator and we set the deadline as the 14th. So that would be tomorrow. If I want to batch change the deadlines of documents, it's not really possible in the Windows application without actually reassigning to a different translator. So I would have to go through each document one by one and change the deadline. Obviously, if I have 1 or 2 documents, that's not a problem. But if I have 10 languages, each language with 10 documents, this can be a little bit complicated. So instead of doing that, what you could do is you can go to the project page in memoQ Web, which is basically the project management part of memoQ Web. And if you click the project name and go to translations, you will see the exact same documents, of course. But what you can do here is you can just select all of your files. And as you can see, you will have an option to set deadline of the selected documents. So I can just batch change the deadline of all of the files instead of doing this one by one. Okay, so with that being said, let's go back to the Windows application. We can see that the deadline actually changed. And the last step, or the next step, would be to decide what kind of linguistic resources these translators will work with. We won't go through all of those because if I open the resource console, you will see that we have quite a number of resources that you can actually work with. But I will just mention a few of the most interesting ones. So the first resource would be live docs, which have two use cases. One use case is to import reference files here. So basically, you can create a new folder or create a new live docs, which I usually call a folder. And then into this folder that you created, right here on the bottom, I can import documents. And this document would be a reference file, but I have two ways to upload these reference files. One option is simply use import document and click OK. And this will be an indexed document. What an indexed document means is that during translation, directly in memoQ, I can do lookups in the content of the file. But for example, I couldn't open this in Microsoft Word. And the other option is in the filter dropdown, you have a filter called import as is binary. You can select this configuration and memoQ will just import the document as a binary file. A binary file means that if I double click this file, instead of opening the document in memoQ, it would open in the original application, which is Microsoft Word in my case. And the other use case of live docs is to do an alignment. So if you have never worked with a tool like memoQ, you can still leverage from your previous translations. If you have two documents, one source file and its translation, another file, which I have on my desktop, I can possibly just go there. So I have two files right here. This is an English document, and that's the German machine translation version of that document. So please don't judge the translation itself. But basically, if you have two files like that, I can just select the add alignment pairs function, and I can upload one source and one target file. And that's what I will do. So just upload the English and upload the German file. As long as the file names are similar, memoQ will automatically know to align those. But it can also happen that the file names are different and you will see two files not being aligned. In that case, you can just select both of them and link them together. And then memoQ will grab the text from both of these files and it will automatically align the source text with the translation. Now, as I'm saying, this is an automated alignment, so it won't be perfect every time, depending on the content and depending on the formatting of the file. But of course, you can make changes to the automated alignment. If we just right-click the documents and select the View Edit function, and then go back to the dashboard, we should hopefully see it. I'll just remove this because we don't need it. There we go. So you can see the left side is the English document, the right side is the German one. And you can simply click Edit Document and then start joining and splitting sentences to have a better alignment. Of course, if you have a huge file, you possibly don't want to go through it segment by segment. In that case, what we usually suggest is you can just go through every, 10, 20 segments that you have here and make some changes. And then you can run the automated aligner again, which will take into consideration the changes that you made. And that way you will have a better and better and better alignment as you go. And of course, once we have the alignment, we could export that alignment into a translation memory, but it's not necessary. We can just leave these alignments in live docs kind of as a reference to leverage from them. And then whatever we actually do in the memoQ, that will be saved into the translation memory. So let me just assign one of those to the project. And the next thing would be term bases, which could be interesting. This would be a terminology database. And memoQ actually have two types of terminology management. This term base that we see here is the built-in one that comes for free with the memoQ server. And there is also an additional add-on called QTerm, which allows for advanced terminology management. Whenever you are setting up a new term base, you can make the term base moderated, which would allow either a project manager or a dedicated terminologist to accept or reject new entries or changes that the translators made. And you can also enable late disclosure which would mean that new entries or change entries are not being used unless someone accepts them. So those are kind of the main three resources that would be interesting. From there, if we go into settings, we will find so-called light resources. There are quite a few of them, but again, let me just mention two of these. One is machine translation. So memoQ doesn't do machine translation. We don't build an engine ourselves. What we have is integration with third-party providers, and we have a bunch of those. You can connect to Amazon, Google, DeepL, and we also have an integration with Intento, which is actually a hub to multiple machine translation providers. And basically all of these work the same way. You subscribe for their service, you receive some kind of key from them that you add in memoQ, and then based on the number of characters that you machine translate in memoQ, you pay the provider. You are not paying anything for us. And actually, there are two ways on how you can use machine translation. One is during pre-translation. So when you are pre-translating a document, wherever you don't have a match from your own resource, like a translation memory, you can just send those out to machine translation. And the other way of using machine translation is through translation results. So while the translator is working, they could see the matches coming from machine translation. Now, I usually recommend to only use one of these, either pre-translate or allow the users to use the translation results, because you don't necessarily want to pay twice for the same content. I mean, if you already pre-translated something, there is no point sending the same content during translation to the provider. One benefit of doing it the other way around, though, so instead of using pre-translation to use the translation results, is that it would allow for machine translation concordance. Basically, the translator can do lookups of parts of sentences instead of looking up the whole sentence itself. And the other interesting option here would be QA settings. QA settings is quality assurance settings. As the translator is working on a document, they can receive warnings and errors from memoQ that suggest some problem with the translation. And you, as the project manager, can set up what kind of warnings and errors to show. These can relate to turn bases, to consistency, numbers, but we will have a whole session just about this, so I don't want to go into too much details. Now, once we went through all the resources, of course, in most cases, we want to run statistics on the file, which will give us the word count, and it will show us how much we can leverage from the different resources that we selected in the project. So it just tells me that there will be 1,800 words to be translated. As you can see, for most of these, I will have 101% match. And I even have a weighted word count where the weight is 0% for me because I do not charge for 101% match. And so the total word count will be about 100 words that I actually have to translate. If you are not interested in the fuzzy matches, you could also just turn off project TM and Corpora, and that would just give you a word count if you are just interested in, let's say, the repetitions within that file. After you run statistics, if you see that you have any matches, you can also pre-translate the document. And during pre-translation, you have different options to choose from. What type of matches do you want to insert into the translation? These are by default 60% and above, 95% and above, exact is 100%, and then exact with context is 101% matches. As I mentioned, these are just the defaults. If, let's say, you are interested in inserting 90% matches, what I would do is just change the good TM match threshold. And you can do it in a light resource called TM settings, which is translation memory settings. If you create a new one, because of course you cannot modify the default, you will see that the minimum is 60, the good threshold is 95, and if you change these, it will change the behavior of the pre-translation action. And once you went through the whole setup of the project, what you would do is you would launch the project to send out email notifications to the assigned users. In this case, the admin user and the test user would receive an email notification that they can start working on this document. So let me just do that so I can show you the email after this. And of course, from here, the project manager would just monitor the project itself. You can run different reports as the project is progressing. And at the end, you would just go ahead and export the document out of memoQ. The main idea is that whatever file you uploaded, you receive the same type of document with the same formatting, just the source text replaced with the translation. Of course, there are exceptions. For example, when you upload a PDF, the end result will be a Word document instead of a PDF. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the other way of creating projects is using a project template. So basically everything that I did here, the manual way, you could automate using a project template. Just to quickly show you, going back to the resource console, I will go to project templates, and I already have a few of these, so I won't create a new one. So let me just open the template, and you will see that basically we have the exact same options. So name of the project, metadata fields, languages, translation memories and term bases can be assigned. Users can be assigned and their roles can be specified here. And then within automated actions, you can even automate the assignment, the analysis, the pre-translation, and basically every action that you would manually do. And from there, let's just see what a translator would see when they receive an email notification. So I will just try to find that notification that I received. There we go. So this is just the default notification that they get. Of course, it would be possible to customize this if we wanted to. It basically just tells the translator that the document is assigned to them in this language. This is my role and that is my deadline. And from here, the translator has two ways to start working. One option is to double click that MQDF file, which only works if I have the Windows application. In that case, the checkout online project window will open. It will select the project itself, and I just click checkout project to start working on this. And of course, I can also manually invoke this window. I don't necessarily have to use the notification. I can just click checkout from server, connect to the server, select the project, and then click checkout project. Or once again, where the web version could be a little bit more useful is the translator could go to WebTrans. WebTrans would be basically a dashboard for the translators where they could see all of their tasks. And as you can see, comparing the two windows, you can see more details in WebTrans. So here you can just see when the project was created, what's the deadline, but you cannot really see how the project is progressing, for example, if someone else worked on it. If you go to WebTrans, you can actually see more details. And instead of just filtering for project names, you can also filter for document names if you want to open a specific document for translation. And even if you just use this interface as a dashboard, you can still work in the Windows application, because for every document you have the little Q icon. And by simply clicking on that icon, you can open the document for translation in the Windows application itself. As long as I don't have an additional window open, of course. There we go. Okay, so before jumping into the questions, just quickly, let's go into the translation interface. So opening the document for translation, you will be presented with what you can see right now. On the left side, you have the source text. On the right side, you are entering the translation. And on the bottom, you have an HTML preview. A preview is not available for every file type, but it is available for most of them. And this is a dynamic preview. So as you are doing the translation, you will see the preview change, and that could give you some context on what you are translating. And of course, as the translators are going through a document, they have many functions to use and many databases to build. When I translated a sentence, I confirmed that sentence with a keyboard shortcut. And whenever I confirm the sentence, it will be saved into the translation memory. Others will be able to immediately leverage from this translation that I did. If I see anything that would be useful as a terminology entry, I can build the term base as well. I can basically just highlight two words, one in the source, one in the target, and pressing a keyboard shortcut, I can directly send this into the term base. And once again, others can immediately leverage from these. If you make some mistakes in the translation, let me just make one here. I just added an extra number that shouldn't be there. You will see that memoQ gives you a warning immediately after confirming. And you have multiple ways to check this warning. One option is to simply double click, which tells you that there is an extra number. The other option is that the preview pane can be changed to review, which shows you the inserted match, and it also shows you the warning that quality assurance found. And of course, if you have a huge file and you don't want to go through the document segment by segment, you would just run quality assurance manually, and this would give you a list of warnings. And you could fix them right here in this resolve errors and warnings window. For example, if it's a real problem, I would just remove that and I would confirm the segment again. If you fix the problem, you will see that it will be highlighted in green, so you know you don't have to touch that anymore. If it's a false positive because the translation is actually correct, I could just ignore it. And I'm not sure how visible that is, but that will have this light bluish view. And you can even hide these ignored items if there are too many of them. In some cases, you might also need some context on the problem. So maybe seeing just the sentence itself is not enough. In that case, you can double click the warning and memoQ takes you to that part of the document. And of course, you can check the preview. You can make the change that you want and you can confirm. And even if you fix the problem in this environment, going back to the resolve errors and warning window, will still know that you fixed the problem and they will be highlighted in green the same way. And let's just assume that you are the translator, you went through the whole document and you confirmed everything. The last step that you would do is deliver return. You can only do this when you confirmed all the segments, and basically you are using this to move the document forward in the whole workflow. When you deliver, whoever is next in line will receive an email notification, let's say the proofreader. And one thing to note is when the proofreader finishes working on the document, the project manager by default doesn't receive an email notification. If you want that to happen, you have to additionally enable one of these options to receive a notification when all the segments are confirmed, let's say by the reviewer in the document. And that would be the only way to get notified. Otherwise, you would have to rely on, well, possibly the progress bar, either on the dashboard or within the project itself. And I would say let's start going through some of those questions that you had. Let me just see what we had. So first question was, well, actually the first question was about live docs, but that's something that I would have to double check myself. I don't want to say something that is not true. So what I can do is I will just assign a translator here and we will double check in a moment. But let's just say that the first question was whether it's possible to disable machine translation for a set of users instead of disabling for everyone. That is currently not possible. Unfortunately, you either disable machine translation for everyone or not. What you could do, and well, it's not, once again, it's not 100% way of doing this, but you can basically just not assign any machine translation plugin to your project as the project manager, and you just tell your internal translators that whenever they downloaded the project, they should assign the machine translation setting themselves. And what you can make sure is that your machine translation setting that you subscribe to is only available to your internal translators, and external translators cannot see it. Unfortunately, this doesn't disable machine translation for externals. So if they have their own subscription, they they can just use their own subscription. But this would be a way to make sure that only internals use your subscription itself. So the second question was again about machine translation, that it usually uses specific terminology that has to be changed. Yeah, so certain machine translation providers offer trained engines, and that's what you could use here. So basically, the question is whether you can force your own terminology on machine translation. And the answer is kind of yes. For example, the advanced version of Google Translate, the advanced plugin, allows you to train the plugin based on your own terminology, and then that's what it will use during machine translation. Of course, there are other engines that do not offer this. And also those engines that do offer it usually offer it for a price. So it's not free to train these engines. Another thing to note there is, of course, QA could be helpful there because it will notify you if you didn't use the correct terminal. So the next question was if I could open a Word document and perform quality assurance. So was there anything in particular that you were interested in, or was that enough that I showed you? If you could just drop another message about that, please. The next question is whether you can create a template based on a project. No, that's not possible. It's always the other way around. So projects are created based on templates, and you cannot really do it the other way around. We also would love to have the modify function like DeepL has it on its website. Honestly, I am not sure what that function is that they have there. This is something that we can get back to you in an email, possibly after the meeting. I would have to check what that does exactly. Next question. If I assign a translator to a project, does she get notification for all documents or in the project? Or can I still use the dashboard to only assign specific documents to them? The translator only receives notification when you assign them to a document. So if you assign someone to a project on the people tab, that won't result in an email notification. As soon as you assign them to a role, that's when they receive a notification, and they only receive the notification once you launch the project. After a project is launched, every change would result in a notification. So if I unassign test user, for example, to admin, then both of them would receive a notification. Test would receive that they are no longer assigned. Admin would receive that they are now assigned to a new document. So usually there is no notification for the translator when the proofreader finished the document. The only exception is when the proofreader finishes working on a document, they have the option to return the document to the translator. Because let's say I want the translator to have another look, or I want the translator to actually fix the problems that the proofreader found. In that case, there is an email notification. But if the proofreader actually fixes the problems and they deliver the file to the project manager, then the translator wouldn't be notified of that. Okay, so next question. For languages with variations, TMs and TBs are sometimes all added to a project. What can be done to avoid this? I assume you are using some project templates to assign those resources, if I'm not mistaken. So we would have to look into whether we can change your template to avoid that from happening. I would say if you could just reach out to me in an email after this meeting. I cannot give you a direct answer right now. So if you just reach out to me, we could investigate a little bit on what could be done. And can project files from Google Docs be imported and exported in a direct way? The answer is not really. Google Docs are not the same as Word documents. memoQ can handle Word documents, but it cannot directly handle Google Docs, at least not at this time. We are actually getting that question more and more, so I do see a chance that we will have some kind of integration, hopefully soon. Nothing is set in stone. Okay, we still have a few minutes, I believe. So next question, can I assign an external translator who does not work with memoQ to a role? Yes, you can. It could help you to know who was assigned to the document, but if someone wants to work with a different tool, you have a few options actually. You can either send them a translation package that we mentioned at the beginning. You could get bilingual files, plain XLIF files that can be handled with any other tools and send this to the translator. Or on your memoQ server, you can have a number of floating licenses. These are concurrent access licenses, and you can lend these to the translator, basically giving them a license for this project, and they could work. If they have a Translator Pro license, they could work using the Windows application. If you have a web license, for example, they could work through the web browser to do the translation. The second part of the question, whether they could go to memoQ Web, download the package and upload the translated files. Yes, they can go to memoQ Web. Yes, they can download the package, but unless they work with memoQ, they won't be able to generate the return package, and thus they won't be able to upload the translated files. So the return of the files would be possibly in a bilingual format that you would just drag and drop into your project manually to update the files with the translation you received from them. This way of working, simply going to memoQ Web and going to the package tasks window, doesn't require any license. Translators only take a license when they actually open a document for translation. So you could do this with any number of users. So next question is, when being online, can you open a doc file? In the past, you could only when being local offline. Oh, well, you have to download the so-called local copy to be able to run quality assurance. So basically, from this window where you manage the project, you cannot run QA. You have to click checkout local copy. You have to download this and run it. One option would be that you could do is within project template, if you go to automated actions, you will see triggers, for example, translator delivers document, and you can simply automate QA reports at these triggers, run QA and export on server. And if you automate this export of the QA report at certain triggers, then you would have a files tab right here, and you could just download the QA report that was automatically generated and you wouldn't have to check out the local copy to be able to run QA. Next question, whether I could show group sourcing and first accept. Yes, I can just quickly do that. So when you are assigning the document, as I mentioned, you can do a first accept with multiple users even. So instead of seeing one username here as a translator, I would just see multiple, because this means that I used first accept. And then if I go into the local copy, the translator would receive a notification that there is a document with first accept, something like that. I can see that this is the one where first accept is in progress, and I can just double click the document to actually see the content. At that point, when I open the document, I cannot modify it yet. So if I tried to change anything, I couldn't do it because I didn't accept this yet. Of course, I could also run, let's say, statistics on the file if I'm interested in the word count, if I'm interested in the leverage. And then I can just do a first accept and either accept this document or decline the document. When you accept something, and I go back here to the management window, you will see that now the actual translator is assigned, so I don't see multiple anymore. And when you are assigning for first accept, you also have this respond until. So if no one takes this job till that time, then you receive an email notification as a project manager, and you can just reassign this to others. Group sourcing would mean that you can assign multiple users, and each of them can open the document. They don't have to accept it or anything. They can just start making changes. The only thing to keep in mind with group sourcing is everyone who made changes to the document has to deliver. And that's when it will move forward to the next step. So if there was 3 people working on the file, 3 people will have to deliver. Okay, let me just see if there is anything that we can quickly answer. Is it possible to import Studio TB directly into a memoQ term base? If you just go here and select the import option, you will see each file type that we can handle. So if you have a TBX or multi-term TB, we can handle those. But you can possibly also export term bases into an Excel format, and you could just upload that. And the same applies to translation memories. When you are importing translation memories from other tools, usually you can get a TMX file, but for example, you can also get an SDL TM that we could